Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. Here at Queer Pressure Podcast, we like to give you a heads up for what's coming, so if you don't want to listen to an episode that deals with racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, sex work, homelessness, hate crimes, and gender identity, go ahead and hop off now. But for the rest of you, please keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle at all times and enjoy the ride. Hi, everybody. I'm Maddie Gray.
And I am Catherine Johnson, and you are listening to Queer Pressure Podcast.
We are so glad that you have decided to join us.
Queer Pressure is a podcast that is a critical exploration of queerness in media as a radical act of self-love in trying times.
Especially in trying times. On this week of Queer Pressure Podcast, we are absolutely delighted to introduce you to our special guest and all-around badass derby dyke, Hanners Bananas.
Yay! Round of applause.
Hi, Hanners.
Round of applause.
Podcast is an audio medium.
Yeah, but we can hear it.
Yes, but also it's a media of the imagination.
That is true.
Is it? Hannelore, tell us about yourself.
What's there to say? I play roller derby and I have a dog. That's the entirety of my personality for the past 8 months. That's all I've been. That's all I've done. It's who I am now.
Hannelore is also an old friend of ours. I've known Hannelore since middle school.
Yeah, middle school.
7th grade, I think. Yeah. And she was a guest on our old podcast, and she was great, so we wanted to have her back.
Mm-hmm.
First order of business. What is everyone drinking?
I'll go first. I'm drinking water.
So sensible.
Delicious.
Wow. Catherine, what are you drinking?
I am drinking box wine with LaCroix. A spritzer.
A spritzer, yeah.
As the white people say.
I am drinking Chateau Ste. Michelle Pinot Gris.
Second order of business, I like to start the podcast off with a fun little question that has something to do with the movie, but given the current climate, fuck whether or not it has to do with the movie. My question is, what the fuck is going on in the world right now?
It's the apocalypse, my friend.
Yeah.
Welcome to the end.
This is our first episode we've done since the COVID quarantine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we should address that. This probably still won't come out for another week, so who fucking knows what could happen between now and then.
Yeah.
So, how is everyone handling so far?
I'm actually doing great. I've fully expected myself to be bouncing off the walls right now because I've been basically inside for almost 3 weeks at this point because I got conveniently sick before this all happened. But
with not coronavirus?
With something else. And so I've been skating inside my new apartment.
I saw that on your Instagram today.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing basically between that and working from home.
So I have two stories to share.
Okay, you always have two things.
I know, but these are completely relevant, I promise.
You had better prove it.
Okay, so first thing, my therapy has turned over to teletherapy because, we have a shelter in place in Washington. And in my last teletherapy conference with my therapist asked the question that she always asks at the top, which is, how are you? And for the very first time, I was like, actually kind of great.
Jesus.
And she was like, what?
You optimists.
No, I'm not an optimist.
That was also how my therapy appointment went.
Yeah, my therapist was telling me about how this is a really common response for people with severe anxiety disorders and people with PTSD, that when the shit really does hit the fan, we are very good in a crisis. Yeah. Because one, we've been imagining this day coming, and two, we've prepared because we've been imagining this day coming. So that's my first story.
I'm stepping in before the second one.
Mm-hmm.
I've also noticed I just have trained myself so well, not perfectly, but I just know the steps that I need to do every day to not feel depressed at the end of the night. I don't always do them, but I know what they all are,
Yeah.
So I'm not bouncing off the walls as much as my friends are.
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely had nights that I was really, really despondent, didn't want to deal with this anymore, but I'm feeling fine right at this second. But I think it's because I actually exercised today.
Well,
yeah,
that's good.
The exercise, making sure that I get dressed every day.
Yeah.
Making sure that I at least look outside. Yeah, like doing like minor cleaning things.
But I read years ago that making your bed every day, as much as I fucking hate that because I'm a slob, but it actually does help with depression a lot. So there's a little tip. I've been running up and down my stairs all day, and my cat's mad at me now.
That's pretty funny.
What was your second story, Matt or Stein?
Okay, so I don't know if I've mentioned on this podcast yet, but I do have a grandmother who is a Jehovah's Witness.
You have not mentioned that yet. But
I didn't think I had.
Steady influence.
Oh, yes. But my mother lives with her on her ranch. And my mother said that shortly before the shelter in place went into effect in Washington, which is where they live, my grandmother went to one of her meetings with the other Jehovah's Witnesses. And oh boy, they definitely think this is end times, folks.
I would think so too.
And that's all my grandmother will talk about right now.
It feels like it's fucking end times, and I'm not religious. I don't think that they're crazy.
Well, I don't know. Times. Like, my grandmother also thought it was end times when 9/11 happened, and then she thought it was end times when Obama got elected.
I'm just saying, I don't know. If you're a real Christian, you really believe this shit, I would also think it was end times. I'm sure we will talk about coronavirus plenty. I just wanted to establish
where we are in the world.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I noticed, like, all the daily podcasts I listen to, the morale has gone down, like, every day.
Yeah, no kidding.
All they have to talk about is coronavirus.
So let's talk about something more fun.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about something else.
Like maybe Tangerine.
The movie Tangerine. What is the movie Tangerine?
It was a 2015 American comedy drama directed by Sean Baker and written by Sean Baker and Chris Burgos. It premiered at the 2015 Sundance Film Festival with a limited release in 2015 through Magnolia Pictures. It stars Kitana Kiki Rodriguez as Cindy, Maya Taylor as Alexandra, and James Ransone as Chester. It was also, interestingly, filmed on 3 adapted iPhone 5Ss and won a shit ton of awards, too.
Before we move on, this movie is like so much more known about the iPhone thing than it is about any other aspect of the movie that's also groundbreaking. Because I was totally aware that there was some movie from like 2015 that was filmed on iPhones, and then I was like very surprised to find out it was this. And like doing research, it's like half of everything written about this is just talking about iPhones. So it's kind of a bummer.
Kidding.
Because they weren't filming it on iPhones to try and prove a point. They were micro budgeting.
We'll get into that, but also, like, that ended up being a stylistic choice on top of it.
Yeah, but the whole point wasn't to, like, drum up, like, look, we did a movie on iPhones. Like,
no.
That was never the point.
It also has a 7.1 out of 10 on IMDb and a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, so very well received. So, Hannelore, at the beginning of every media thing that we try to break apart, we try to get the bad out of the way first so that we can, like...
The problematic.
So that we can absorb the piece in its goodness afterwards. So,
where, like, for example, we did Harry Potter, and the list of problematic things took us, like, 20 minutes to get through.
It's true. It was a lot.
We did the show Sex Education, and we just said, nah, it's fine, and continued on. So... The problematic, the bad, it was written and directed by Sean Baker, who is a cis white man. Mm-hmm. The other thing we have on here is that there are white characters who use the N-word repeatedly.
Yeah.
Going into it, when I knew, like, oh, this was written by a white cis man, that isn't really the whole story.
It isn't,
because should we give a synopsis first before we explain how the movie was?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, I have some notes on this, too. So if you want to read it, you don't have to.
I don't know how to read, so you're really calling me out right now. This movie... The premise is Cindy, just back from a 28-day stint in prison, returns to find out from her fellow transgender sex worker and best friend, Alexandria. Is it Alexandra or Alexandria?
She called her both of those things, so...
that her boyfriend pimp, Chester, has been cheating on her while she's been locked up.
And she sets out to attack the woman who did it.
Yeah, and this movie is very much a Christmas classic. It takes place on...
It sure is.
Christmas Eve.
So what's interesting about the writing of that script is that, so Sean Baker met Maya Taylor, who played Alexandra or Alexandria, depending on which time Cindy's talking to her. He met her at a LGBT center in near Santa Monica and Highland, where this movie is filmed. And they started talking, and Maya shared her stories about things that had happened to her as a trans sex worker in LA. And then Sean Baker developed that script, but then she had, like, her thumb on it a lot of the time. Like, it was a collaborative work the whole time.
That's really good to hear, because like a lot of it was like, this could be a real script where like people are trying to have fun, or it could be like a poorly educated cis dude.
Yeah, totally.
Who just knows what fish means. And
right.
That was my fear the first time watching it.
Right, totally.
Because he started by, the idea was just that like they wanted to do some micro budget movie about the corner of Highland and Santa Monica. And so they just kept, all he had in his mind was that he wanted a confrontation at donut time, which in the movie is a common location. It's at the beginning and the end. And he just hung out there with the other writer. And as Madison say, that's how they met Maya Taylor. The other main actress, Kiki Rodriguez, was Maya's roommate. And she had wanted to be an actress, so Maya came back and was like, you want to do this thing with me? We'll just do it together. And that's how the two of them were cast. And they made a big deal to Sean Baker that, like, they wanted it to be witty and funny, but they wanted it that, like, they're saying the funny, witty things, that they're never the butt of the joke.
Right. And Maya Taylor actually had like 2 conditions for her to be involved in this project. I was watching this interview with her and she was like, I only had 2 things that I wanted from this project. 1, I wanted it to be real and raw, and I didn't want it to like look away even when that realness was ugly. And 2, the movie had to be hilarious. She was like that's how people cope. That's how people live. Like the only way to deal with, you know, anything is through humor.
Yeah.
At least in her experience had been. And like interacting with Maya Taylor and her friends, Sean Baker totally noticed that she was using like humor as a coping mechanism. And like he thought about how humor is something that, you know, everybody deals with or uses to deal with things in their lives. And he decided that this was a universal human experience that he wanted in the movie.
Yeah. And I don't know. I like that. Like it was only like a few specific points where it's like questioning whether or not the writing was just like a project of like a white cis dude, but most of the time it like felt rather natural, and that makes sense given how much input.
And the actresses are apparently very proud of this movie, and a lot of like their friends who are sex workers said they really love the movie because it's like a day in their lives, which no one makes movies about.
Yeah, that's really awesome. That's super good to hear.
And it's a romp. I need to refill my wine glass already.
Wow.
That's exactly what I was doing. So what were the standout things for everybody? Like, what was the thing that hit you the most with this story or this movie?
The performance part?
Mm-hmm.
So the part in the movie that Hannelore is talking about is Alexandra puts on this performance at a bar where she sings Toyland, which kind of was like the unofficial theme song of this movie.
Mm-hmm. And
she invites everyone throughout the movie. One of my favorite parts is actually when she's handing out these flyers and she's like, do not disappoint me, and like it's just very funny about it. And nobody shows up besides her best friend Cindy
and Dinah, who Cindy has taken hostage.
My third rewatching of it, I kind of realized like how much of a chaotic fucking force Cindy is, but she's also this great friend because she just comes tumbling in out of buttfuck nowhere with another prostitute like under her arm that she's like been beating up all day, and it's like, all right, let's go, let's see your song, and she's the only one who shows up. Yeah. And she had a good excuse to not show up because she was dragging this woman across LA all night.
Not only that, but she literally just got out of prison.
Yeah, that day.
Yeah, she should have been working. She makes the point to Chester later on that she had $2 and she spent one of them on the bus and one of them on a donut. I don't know the answer to this, but do you think that there's symbolism to the song that she sings? So when she's at this bar by herself just singing this song, and she's had to pay to even be allowed to sing it, and then nobody shows up, and she sings Toyland. Do you guys think there's any significance to that song?
Let me look up the lyrics to it real quick.
I mean, it felt like, if anything, it was supposed to have been like a personally meaningful song. Mm-hmm. Like, it wasn't like a like lounge performance where she was dancing. She was like sitting down in a chair and singing basically just to her friend.
And it's not a super common Christmas song.
No, it's not.
It's really pretty.
Do you want me to read the lyrics?
Sure.
It's Toyland, Toyland, little girl and boy land. While you dwell within it, you are ever happy there. Childhood's joyland, mystic merry toyland, once you pass its borders, you can ne'er return again. When you've grown up, my dears, and are as old as I, you'll laugh and ponder on the years that roll so swiftly by. And then there's childhood's joyland, mystic merry toyland. Once you pass its borders, you can ne'er return again.
I feel like the obvious connection is between like Cindy just getting back and getting high at basically like her not first opportunity, but like the same day that she gets back.
Yeah, stealing Dinah's meth and then using it.
To be fair, she did bring the pipe.
That's true. She did. It was her piece. So something that I really liked about that moment was that the drug use in this movie is not necessarily glorified or treated as a tragedy. It's kind of just like,
girl gang.
you know, these are characters who use drugs, who are drug addicts, and like Tangerine just like catches this part of their lives on camera. This is just like a part of it that happens.
That's it's a huge
like,
part of this movie.
Of especially like big budget movies, if there's drug use involved, they make a huge show of it. Whereas this is like something that happens kind of in passing, really.
Yeah, they're all in the bathroom together.
Yeah, it's just like Alexandra is like putting on her makeup and it's happening and she's just kind of like, really, you're gonna do this now? Sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even with like the wishful thinking of hoping that all these people that she invited show up to watch her perform, like, I don't know, it just seems like this song is a lot about like wishful thinking in ways.
Yeah, you're right.
A big part of this is, as well, is they don't, as you were saying, like they don't treat a lot of this as tragic. If we really read into the song, this would kind of be the only moment of that, of when they're talking about like when you get older and if you look at where she is in her life, you know.
Yeah, I mean, aside from like probably the end where Cindy is assaulted by somebody driving by and throws urine on her.
Yeah, there's not a lot of...
This is like the only real moment of tragedy in this movie before that.
Yeah, those two moments, almost like a relief of like a lot of tension, which is really interesting that they're using tragedy as relief.
Yeah, because I feel like they're using comedy as the core.
Yeah, because like you have all this chaotic momentum that's kind of like that busy humor. I don't know. It made me think about Weekend at Bernie's, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Of just like this massive buildup of action where it's just like stuff keeps happening and stuff keeps like getting added in.
I made my roommate watch this and
You made Matt watch it?
Oh, yeah. And honestly, he loved it. This
Really?
is the first thing that I've made him watch for this podcast that he was like, this was a near perfect movie.
Because for context, Hannelore, in one of our past episodes, we did Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and he really didn't like it.
Yeah,
and
he walked
we
out.
talked in depth about like how cisgender men just can't watch these kinds of movies and walk away unaffected. So that is very interesting that he really liked that movie.
So he liked also, like, he said the only thing that he didn't love about this movie was how the momentum dies at the end. He said he liked the image at the end, but that after all that chaotic tension, that felt like a letdown.
That's a very male perspective.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I love the ending.
I did too. It's my favorite part of the movie.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because when you consider the theming of the movie of, you know, like a moment in time sort of piece, rather than like a protagonist perspective, like it makes sense that you have like it starts at like a low energy moment and ends at a low energy moment, because it's kind of like that so time passes on feeling,
because it begins with just the two of them talking at donut time and the first line is "Merry Christmas, bitch." That's the thesis of the whole,
like it's very much like literally a day in the life of, like, you get like the full day.
And that's a huge part of what Sean Baker wanted out of this movie.
Yeah.
He wanted, like, he used iPhones not only because it was, like, budgetarily friendly, but also because, like, stylistically, he wanted the movie to, like, participate in their day-to-day lives as opposed to just, like, observe it like a traditional camera would. The most important thing to him, even more than I think character, was like location. Like this whole movie was about Santa
location.
Monica and Highland in LA,
which it does really well.
It really does. There's a line that really stands out to me. I think her name's Rosmeek. She's the Armenian cab driver's mother-in-law.
Razmik is the cab driver.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah, Rasmik is the cab driver.
Yeah.
his mother-in-law says that LA is a perfectly wrapped lie.
Yeah. Very poetic of her. And then the cab driver she's with says, agree to disagree. It took till my third watching of it before I started to think about that line.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I was just kind of like, okay, cool.
Well, also, it's in subtitles because she says it in Armenian.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the cab driver is really right, because, like, the mother-in-law kept on, like, talking about how she was going to unmask him, but, like, his wife already knew.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And was aware of the situation, and, like, all of his cab driver coworkers already know what's going on. Like, even before he dropped her off, he was talking about, like, oh, you should be glad that he's in America, because this
in Armenia. Yeah.
this would go way worse in Armenia.
And what we're talking about here is there's a main character in it that's this cab driver who has a wife and a young daughter, but he frequents transgender sex workers and has actually a very nice relationship with them, it seems like.
And possibly some unrequited love with Cindy.
Oh, possibly. Absolutely. Like, he's obsessed with
Absolutely,
Cindy. Yeah. But, I mean, when Alexandra sees him and says, Razmik, you're a sight for sore eyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about that scene in the car wash?
What
Very
about
clever.
it, Catherine? Yeah, it was really cute.
Cute?
In a clever way, okay?
Yeah, like, it was very clever for sure. Yeah. I love that shot. So it's he's giving Alexandra a blowjob while they're in this car wash, and it just continues as this one shot going all the way through the car wash, and somehow it doesn't get boring, even though all you're seeing is, like, out the front window.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me, it's like the last time I was in a car wash, I was a kid, so it was always like this mystical thing.
Right, with
Yeah.
all the colors surrounding you. But I never thought of it, like, from an adult perspective as, like, a place to have, like, a public sexual experience without getting caught.
Yeah. I was like, that guy who dried off the car at the end, I was like, 100% he knows what just happened.
Yeah, he saw something.
Well, like, he doesn't have to see anything, but just, like, a cab driver with somebody sitting in the front seat who is pretty obviously a prostitute, like, it's very clear what just happened. And it made me wonder, like, how often shit like that does happen.
Oh, interesting.
People giving each other blowjobs in the car wash. So much of this is written because of, like, because Maya Taylor did have to work in sex work for a while. And so part of me is like, I wonder if that is, like, a trick of the trade, and that's how it ended up in the movie.
Oh, maybe.
It's either a trick of the trade or for the comedy of, like, going to the car wash for a blowjob.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be, like, in such a particular situation to be like, oh yeah, being in this, like, extremely uncomfortable place where it's just, like, lots of loud sounds and stuff's, like, happening all the time to the car, and it keeps on changing. Well, we gotta make do with this.
Well, until somebody comes to dry off your windshield.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why this scene was so, like, engaging was just, like, you were waiting for someone to show up.
Exactly. That anticipation of, is somebody gonna what's gonna happen here?
His timing as he finished up makes me think that they've done that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, for
He's
sure.
like,
Popped
down.
right up. Yeah.
I don't know, it definitely, like, captured that anxiety of public sex.
Yeah.
And I found that pretty interesting.
But, like, with a modicum of privacy. What was everybody's favorite part of the movie? Or let me rephrase, something that either, like, entranced you, made you happy, or confused you even.
Oh, what confused me was, like, the absolute lengths that Cindy was going to, like, find Dinah was just, like, mind-boggling to me. But I guess that was the comedy, is just, like, she is figuratively going to, like, the ends of the earth to find this woman who she doesn't actually know at all.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't even know her real name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Incidentally, just got lucky, essentially.
Yeah. My first time watching it, I was so sure she had grabbed the wrong woman.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But then the second time I watched it, I was like, actually, this trail is sound. Like, the people she's talked to, like, this is the right person. Because I was like, how the fuck did she find the right person? She was just knocking on doors and saying, like, her name's, like, Desiree or something, and then just grabbed the first person who had a D in her name. But actually, it is sound, which made me think this movie is kind of like a quest movie. Like,
Yeah.
a fantasy
Yeah, a little
quest.
bit. Because she went and talked to someone who worked for Chester, and then she went and found a John, and then she went and found like the house mother, essentially. Her trail made sense like after the fact, where you're like, who are these people that she's talking to, and this trail that she's going down?
Why do you guys think that she went on this, like, I don't want to say crazy, because I don't think it's crazy to go after go after maybe in the way that she did is kind of crazy, but why do you think she went on this quest, this journey, the way she did? Because, like, it sounds like everybody in this block radius knows that Chester's, 1, a pimp, and 2, a cheater.
I don't know, for the sake of love.
For the sake of something to believe in.
Yeah, I like that take.
She was in jail for like a month and had apparently been proposed to like immediately before being arrested.
Yeah.
That's still like, that was like probably her motivation through getting through a month in a men's prison.
Right. Yeah. We haven't even addressed that. Yeah, she would have absolutely been put into a men's prison.
I was wondering that. Yeah, for sure. Which they don't talk about at all. Yeah, that's a big part of this movie, is they don't focus on the tragedy of their situation.
Right. Well, because, like, for sex workers on the streets of LA, like, there's no time to just dwell in the tragedy. They have to get back to their days, to their lives, to their work.
Yeah. And so that's why this movie is definitely a standout. It was actually like a reaction to Jared Leto winning the Oscar for Dallas Buyers Club. Yeah, where he plays a transgender woman. That he was, I don't know, he had a friend who said how fucked up that was, and Sean Baker was like, you know what, that is fucked up. So the response is that the two, and he didn't go out looking to make a movie about Black transgender sex workers. It just ended up being the most interesting story, but then was diligent in casting Black transgender women in those roles instead of
Jared Leto. And
Eddie Redmayne.
Instead of like mainstream actors too. Like these are people who are interested in acting, but like have not necessarily ever been in a movie before.
Yeah, because you are laughing with them instead of...
Absolutely.
I do think it's interesting because this movie, because like I haven't watched any of the other movies, especially the ones with like Jared Leto, and because the whole thing is that the women are a spectacle.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And this movie doesn't really do that. Like when they are a spectacle, it's either because they are doing it themselves, and usually for like either for money or for like a joke. Like that specific part where Cindy is like peeing in the bathroom and teasing Dina about like fucking Chester in the ass, and like getting really like up in her face about it, is like she's making a spectacle of herself, but that's like the driving force of the humor, is that she's making a spectacle of herself like on purpose.
Right.
The other times, like when they're not like making a spectacle of themselves to make money specifically, it's to like comfort each other, or like the assault scene. It's like otherwise it's kind of just like life as is, and it's in passing and stuff like that. Where it's not like the lens that you're looking at these women's lives through is like a lens of like they are a spectacle and their life is a spectacle.
Totally, yeah. Which is something that, like, especially movies where a cis male plays a transgender woman, that always is the thing. They're always trying to make a spectacle out of their identity.
It's Oscar bait.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's what Eddie Redmayne won the Oscar, Jared Leto won the Oscar, Hilary Swank, I think, won the Oscar. To just sum up, like, how film studies thinks of, like, transgender films, in this book, the only entry for Boys Don't Cry, which is a movie about a transgender man, it listed it as, like, Hilary Swank plays a lesbian who does this, and this. And I was like, Jesus fucking Christ. Like, I feel weird citing this book anymore. It's a little bit older of a book, but
it happens. Like, I have like a lot of queer theory books. For me now, they're books of like spectacle, because like in the first chapter they're like talking about transsexualism and stuff like that in terrible ways, and it's like, well, you tried
and
did you?
Yeah, you didn't try that hard, but
yeah.
I just think it's really interesting looking at media from that like time period, books and media and stuff written by like white women in academia or like white people in academia were far less understanding and far less like accepting than like queer comic artists in that time period were just like, yeah, this is normal, because they were like working class people who lived in Berlin and were like, oh, no one would do this if they had any other choice. 80 to 90% of the time going into sex work. So it's like people are doing this because they need to, which is like what you see with like Dykes to Watch Out For and stuff like that, is that they had like a very nuanced perspective for the time.
This is what I was screaming about during the Portrait of a Lady on Fire episode, was just white feminists shitting all over queer theory and trans theory, and that even though they're doing a bit better, I'm just salty about it, and I just don't want feminism to touch queer theory or trans theory.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Something I was reading today, because we talk a lot about queer theory on this, and that it's like a newer field. There aren't a lot of established methodologies and shit. And I was reading that like trans theory is like even newer and doesn't necessarily even fall that well under queer theory. So it's like even more difficult to get like academic texts about trans theory. And when you can, it's usually just like white people, cisgender white people.
Like trans and queer theory right now, what they accomplish is describing the disjoint in like sex and gender, and kind of like sex with itself and gender with itself, that like Judith Butler did in 600 pages in like 50. Like without having to rely on the like historical context of like postmodern feminist work or like postmodern linguistic work. Now we have these ways of like describing and talking about sex as a category and gender as categories.
Separate categories, yeah.
Yeah, well, not even separate categories, but like the fact that sex is a category means that it's ultimately, it's a definition. It's not an observation. We're putting things that we can observe into two discrete boxes.
I have a question about that.
Yeah, go for it.
Because like when I took like feminist theory in college, I remember the big thing everyone was saying then, like a few years ago, was like, gender and sex are different. That I forget which one is which, but like one is your like biological and one is like how you choose to express yourself. And then I was reading something today about like that being problematic, and that hit me as like, that does seem problematic. So do you think it's still, because that seemed so normal at the time. Like I remember explaining that to people, and now that seems like fucked up.
I mean, it was normal at the time to think that like sex and gender are the same in that they are both innate, where to me now my like ideation of sex is that sex is not real and gender is not real. They are ways of like categorizing, because like gender, like I'm thinking about like the Guerrilla Girls and that like punk radical 90s feminism of their like, hey, let's talk about gender play and how gender is a set of behaviors put into categories.
Sure.
Well, sex is the same way, where it's like sets of physical or observational signifiers that we categorize. And so kind of like my position on that is, why does that make it any different? Especially when these like categorizations don't define the space. Like if we're looking at like sex and like human sex morphology, we get like like a slew of intersex conditions and all of these things that are all functional, or at least all real in a way that's like, these, to have a complete modality of sex, we have to be capable of describing all of these categories. And if there are no such categories that fill out the modality, then it doesn't work. Like it's not true to what we can see and observe, which is like, that's the same with gender of where people are, picking behaviors or making choices about the ways that they present themselves or the ways that they act that don't fit in. So other concepts that like friends that I have talk about is like, you have, from the perspective of the patriarchal class, you have men, women, and failed women.
Men, women, and failed women?
3 classes of people.
What's a failed woman?
Like a trans woman is a great example of what society sees as like a failed woman. Like a lesbian is a failed
like
woman.
I would be a failed woman.
Yes.
Exactly.
Cool.
Where
Love
like
that.
because like I mean, welcome to the club.
We're all failed women here.
Yeah, we are.
Because like we're either transgressing against the system of oppression itself because we're not adhering to the categories that it's defined for us.
Sure, yeah.
Or we're showing that like these lines can be like transgressed at all, or that like you don't have to be what every like system in place says that you are, about describing a material reality rather than essentially making things easy.
Right. Yeah. Because separating things into a binary is easier. You can't see me, but I'm doing so much air quotes right now. Than like addressing the true spectrum of things that are possible.
But then the other side of that, which we argue with our friend Robin about, like where he's like, gender doesn't exist, sex doesn't exist, none of these things exist, masculinity doesn't exist, femininity doesn't exist. But then like and a lot of feminists and lesbians think that way as well. But then when someone is transgender, and so then why would someone innately be like, I'm a woman and therefore I want to, you know, wear makeup and things like that if that's how they choose to express. And like, yeah, so that makes, because I feel like some people rely really hard on that thing of like, none of this exists, you know, like this is all made up. But then
I mean, part of it is just like, I would say like deterministic, like self-deterministic morphology. Like we should be able to do what we want to our bodies.
Sure.
At the most base level is like, if I want to go take hormones, then that should just be fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I know and understand the risks, which are very minimal, it's more risky to have a bottle of ibuprofen in your house than it is to have like a bottle of estrogen in your house.
Really?
Interesting.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Like
where like it's easier
estrogen
to cause yourself like long-term liver damage with NSAIDs and ibuprofen than it is to just like take a ton of estrogen. Like you wouldn't have a good time, and it probably would make you sick at a certain point. But
your liver's gonna work.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that makes the alcohol go boom.
Wow.
Yeah. They're not real in that they're like not real strict categorizations, but they are
socially
real in that they are experientially real. Like
yeah, exactly.
Like they're real in a fuzzy way when a lot of things try to make them real in a like a strictly defined, confined way.
So that's kind of where we go wrong, is defining it.
Thing is that like I am a woman, but also I'm a lesbian, and I would say that like lesbian is more akin to my gender experience than just describing womanhood.
Right.
And on top of that, like with being in the whole kind of like femme, butch, lesbian sort of like culture or community, whatever you would like to describe it as, is I find it really interesting that people are kind of like latching on to femme and butch as kind of like aesthetic categories, because for me, I see them as like femme and butch are descriptions of lesbian masculinity and lesbian femininity.
Yeah.
Which are not, I wouldn't even say that they're two categories, but they're not like binary opposites. Because I always find it really interesting because like going through my life as like a femme lesbian, a lot of people outside of the community will describe like the way that I behave or hold myself as butch.
Right. I've had that as well. Yeah.
Which is super interesting to me because like, yeah, I'm aggressive and I stand up for myself and I don't take shit. But like I still wear like 4 or 5 inch high heels and put on a ton of makeup.
Right.
It's really interesting because like other like femme and butch lesbians innately understand me to be femme. So I see these categories are real in that like people who are within like this like lesbian gender system that I'm partaking in understand natively like who I am in that way, like where I fit into this with them, which I always find really interesting.
Yeah, because like very interesting with like the aesthetic versus an innate thing, because I still think of myself as a butch lesbian, which I don't look like anymore. And I had even brought it up with like one of my coworkers, and he was like, no, you're femme. And I was like, no, I'm butch still. And he's like, no, I love femme Catherine, you wear a bunch of glitter and pink and you have blonde hair and like it's fun. And but then
I mean, you do that, but you also act like a dad. So
Yeah,
yeah,
you're a daddy.
but then at the same time, one of the producers on that movie, at one point he like showed me something and I thought it was gross and I went like, ew, like high pitched, and he like could not stop laughing. And I was like, what? And he was like, I never expected you to make that noise. And so I'm someone that like people looking at me are like, that's a femme person, but there's something innate that makes me seem butch, where he like could not believe I was acting like such a girl.
Interesting.
So that is interesting.
Yeah, growing up, my mom kind of always so for context, my mom's a lesbian, but growing up my mom always kind of framed what they called it back then in the late 90s early 2000s was lipstick and butch. She kind of framed it as a binary, but she even acknowledged even back then that she didn't fit in that, like in the idea of that being a binary. And she like made a whole thing of like her AOL account was lipstick butch. Like she called herself a lipstick butch. Somebody who is like, she was aesthetically probably a little bit more femme, but innately a little bit more butch. But like those, I love the idea of thinking of those as not a binary, not a thing that are like diametrically opposed, but things that can work together.
The fun way I've described like being femme the way that I am is that like if there were a defining line between femme and butch, I'm on the femme side and I'm fucking the butch side.
Nice.
Yeah.
So something I like keep talking about and then getting distracted because that's my vibe. How transgender people have been represented in film. Historically, there's always archetypes that like transgender people get put into, and it's either like tragedy or you know like Boys Don't Cry, where he is killed at the end, which is a true story, and or that they're the butt of the joke, that it's men, actual just cisgender men dressing as women because funny, and that is just typically the only stories people want to tell about transgender people, is that either it's somebody who's like, this is funny, or it's like, I'm going to tell a great transgender story, and it's this one we've plucked where it's very tragic, and the whole point of the movie is how like that they are transgender and this is tragic, which we've said tragedy 1,000 times in this, but this movie is so different, where the plot is not about them being transgender. That's just who they are. They are just transgender characters living their life. And so is there anything like tangible you guys can point out that you notice that is that kind of difference of how this is just transgender characters living their lives versus a transgender movie?
Transgender characters are supposed to hate themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
But in a way that's tragic. The whole offhand joke about like, oh yeah, of course life is cruel, God gave me a penis, is that kind of like, it's that gallows humor that like you don't see when trans people are spectacles of like people making fun at their situation.
Right. So that's not an example of like of them being tragic. That's an example of like them celebrating their lives and being able to see them poking fun at it. Okay, so that's like that's like a thin line to walk that most people don't go the right way.
Which is like why I think cis actors should not be playing trans people. Like they don't understand that line as well because they've never experienced it.
Yeah, can you imagine, the last time I was watching it, I'm like, can I imagine if these were all just actually actors that they auditioned who were playing these parts versus that these are like real people that are portraying.
Right.
Maya Taylor is not Alexandra, but a lot of that is pulled from her life. In one of the interviews, she was talking about when they first started this movie, she had just started taking hormones, and she chose to play Alexandra the way she did was because she wanted to play someone who had all this confidence in herself, because she didn't feel that at all. But she should, because she's so funny.
She is. She has very good comedic timing as well.
Oh yeah, she's very funny. A term that kept coming up as I was doing research on this is trans massage noir.
Yeah.
Which, if you're unfamiliar, massage noir is, well, misogyny is being shitty to women. Massage noir is being shitty to women of color. Trans massage noir is being shitty to trans women of color. And I feel like I've barely ever seen anything where there's a transgender person of color. And this is like what we always point out to white feminists is like, this might not apply, but think of like a Black trans woman and what they're going through compared to a white woman. Or like Maya Taylor said that she had to go into sex work because she applied for, I think it was like 100 jobs in like 1 month and did 26 interviews and did not get a job because her license had a man's name and had like the male sex on it because she just didn't have the money to change it. And in her circumstances, and this happens to a lot of people, there was nothing else she could do besides sex work. And then luckily got to do a movie. And then
but I was reading about how she's auditioned for like hundreds of movies since then, and she has not been cast in almost anything.
Yeah. We don't want to fall into the thing of like patting ourselves on the back for how much society has progressed because this movie exists, because only this movie exists. There still aren't a lot of roles for these women.
Yeah, basically. Like it's one movie.
So shall we talk about the end? Because the end is great.
Yeah, the ending is great because it really made me think that the whole point of this movie is about friendship. That's the whole point they're trying to make.
Yeah.
It's not something larger necessarily about being transgender or queer or a person of color. Like, those are definitely facets of the movie, but the whole point of the movie is about the friendship between these two characters. So, Madison, do you want to explain the ending?
Sure. So, at the end, we discover in this heightened, chaotic moment that Chester has been cheating on Cindy with not only Dinah and probably a lot of his other sex workers that work under him, but with Alexandra,
the best friend.
And the best friend, played by Maya Taylor. And Cindy storms off, and Alexandra follows after her. And while Cindy is storming off, some men in a truck throw urine at her, which covers her clothes and covers her wig. And Alexandra grabs her and takes her into a laundromat, gets all of her clothes in the washing machine, gets her wig taken care of. And Alexandra and Cindy are sitting there, Cindy without her wig now. And suddenly Alexandra takes off her wig and hands it to her. And Cindy puts on Alexandra's wig, and Alexandra goes, "Damn, it really looks good on you."
Yeah.
And they have a tender moment, and that's the end of the movie.
Yeah, and it's just plain fucking sisterhood right there. Because another, like, a more symbolic moment of that, where we don't have, like, they're obviously transgender characters, but there isn't a lot of, like, symbolism about being transgender throughout the movie. But when she has the urine thrown on her, she has to piece by piece take off everything that's feminine, you know? Like, she has to take off her clothes, and then she gets to the point where she's just wearing her bra, and she, like, takes her, like, stuffing out and was like, I might as well take this off too, huh? And then has to take her hair off, and it's just so demeaning. But her friend then says, like, whatever, just take my hair, and it's just such a tender moment of support.
You really covered it. And that's kind of like what I enjoyed about that scene specifically, was that the connection that they have and the, like, care that they take for each other is, like, still something that matters and kind of, like, pulls through that like problem.
Yeah, they're the most functional relationship in the whole movie, because we have Chester, who stands up and says, no, we're engaged. This is my girlfriend. I have your tattoo. Like, he's not ashamed to say he's technically monogamous. Like, he even says, like, I didn't cheat on you and stuff like that, but that he's with Cindy. But then he's shitty and he cheats on her. And then his, side girl, Dinah, he's super shitty to in the end, like, won't get her a cab. And where she's been playing up this whole thing of, like, I've been his bottom bitch. He's going to support me. And then one of the other relationships we have is the taxi driver, Razmik, and his wife. And obviously he's been cheating on her with prostitutes, and she stays with him because of, like, financial stability. And so just all these dysfunctional relationships. And then we have these two where there's nothing they're getting out of each other besides just a relationship. And it's very cute. Very nice.
Very
Cute's
nice.
Not the right word. Yeah.
And it shows that there are, like, so throughout this movie, we're seeing, like, the raw, real life of somebody who lives on Santa Monica and Highland.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, this is the real first real moment of genuine tenderness that we see here.
Instead of just,
I think,
blah, blah.
It's been
bang,
wild.
bang, bang.
It's been chaotic. Yeah. It's been, you know, it's been everything.
Been
but
bright
tender.
Orange. Yeah.
And bright orange. But like, this is like, tenderness is still a part of these women's lives.
That once everything is off, that's what's left. Yeah. Does anyone feel that there's a lesson from this movie to carry with themselves forward?
Appreciate trans women, pay sex workers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that reminded me of when Alexandra, like, got stiffed by that guy who did not pay her.
Who did not get stiff.
Who did not get stiff. She was like, that's hard. Ooh.
That's not her fucking fault. Let's be clear. Her job is not to get you off. Her job is to touch your stanky ass. So she should have been paid. It's your job to get off.
I don't know. I feel like I'm taking a little bit of... Because I didn't actually know that part about Maya Taylor playing Alexandra so confident because she didn't actually feel that that confidence in her own life.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. I feel like I'm going to take from that realization that, you know, fake it till you make it.
Oh, absolutely. That's like every day of my life.
Hell yeah.
I'm going to take from it building up the people in your lives because she wasn't feeling confident, but then look at this character that was underneath.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and to have those moments with the people in your life are important and build them up so that they can be funny and fabulous and sing the toy song.
Exactly.
And fucking go to your friends' performances. Oh my god.
Yeah, for real. Oh my god, yeah. we gotta bring that up. If your friend asks you to come to their performance and you're able, you should probably do it.
You should absolutely do it.
So, Catherine, you know what this means now that we've reached the end. You're going to have to pull a nice thing out of the treasure chest.
Yeah, you want to explain to Hannelore what this is?
Absolutely. So,
Yeah,
Hannelore, for Christmas this year, I gave Catherine a pirate's treasure chest, but not
small
just
one.
any pirate's treasure chest. I cut out strips of paper and wrote nice things about Catherine on them, knowing
or
that she
sentimental
hates
things.
sentiment.
Yeah.
And so as a practice of self-love on this podcast, at the end, every time, I'm asking her to read one.
Yeah, and I hate it. To start off, the one I pulled out, because you also put confetti from the Harry Styles concert in here.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is from the Harry Styles concert or just letting you put in, but this is a thing that says "Born to be a Mermaid."
No, yeah, that was from Harry Styles concert.
That's on brand. All right. It's so fitting because it has cherry blossoms on the outside of the paper, which we're not allowed to look at. Okay, so
But
this
they're in
is
blue.
This is an inside joke. This is not a nice thing about me. It says, "Remember Silas at the bus stop?" Which is from the Vampire Diaries and is our favorite fucking thing from the Vampire Diaries.
It's our favorite scene from the Vampire Diaries.
Well, hey, that goes with the theme of treasuring our friendships.
Sure.
That if there's anything
True.
that's similar to that moment those two women had at the laundromat, it's you and I watching fucking Vampire Diaries till 6 a.m. and bawling our eyes out when Stefan died. Spoiler alert.
Oh. Yeah, that was a time. Anyway.
You ready to get out of here?
I'm ready.
You, my chums, have been listening to Queer Pressure Podcast and our critical explorations of queer media as a continued practice of self-love with Katie Lou Johnson.
Hanners Bananas.
And Maddie Gray. Hey, you. Yes, you. Leave us a review on iTunes. And please follow us on Twitter at Queer Pressure PC for podcast, not for
Personal computing.
Great. Okay.
hell yeah. Hannelore with the save.
She saved me. Thank you very much to Hannelore for joining us today. And everyone
Thank you,
Thanks for
Hannelore.
having me.
Everyone, wash your fucking hands. Everyone wash your fucking hands and stay fucking home because I want to go back to work and I'm sick of this. So stop being babies.
Goodbye.
Stop being babies.
Bye.
Bye.